One of the first warship models that I ever built was of HMS Penelope, as she appeared just prior to the Second World War. This was one of a series of models that I'd made to the scale of 32 feet to the inch. They were early models, and I was still trying to find my feet as a model maker. I had already experimented with various scales from 3/8 of an inch to the foot, right down to 50 feet to the inch. As far as I can remember, I had either seen some photographs of Norman's capital ships or had seen them in the Imperial War Museum. These models were built to the same scale, and I was inspired to have a go myself. The hulls and superstructures of these three models were carved, I believe, from some scraps of sycamore I had. This provided me with wooden decks, which were given a coat of dilute varnish before being lined with a very fine rapidograph architect's pen to represent the individual planks. The superstructure was faced up with plastic card, and the majority of the fittings constructed from the same medium. My very first attempt at writing about my work was an article in Model Shipwright number 26, published in 1978, which included this early model of the Penelope. You may note my early attempt at portraying the sea using polyfiller. By the early 1980s, I'd moved away from plastic as the main medium, preferring to work with more traditional wood, card, paper, wire, etc., and was now planking all decks with individual planks cut from wood shavings. I was also building the larger scale of 16 feet to the inch, a scale I've always considered to be ideal for the majority of the models that I've built. And so we come to the second Penelope, built several years later. And because Penelope had proved such a fascinating subject the first time round with a crane and catapult mounted amidships, I chose her as my subject once again. To give the model a little extra life and interest, I decided to show the catapult extended with a Fairy 3F float plane mounted and ready for takeoff. And as a setting, I decided on a fairly choppy sea with Penelope ploughing through the waves. When finished, she went off to market, and I never expected to set eyes on her again. So, when I was contacted recently by her most recent owner to ask if I could carry out some restoration work on her, I was quite excited at the prospect of the reunion. I did not, however, anticipate being quite as thrown by the experience as I was. Working on and living with a model, I become incredibly familiar with all the minutiae of detail and, in a sense, tend to take it for granted. It just becomes part of my daily life. The initial impact of seeing the model again after all this time was actually quite overwhelming. My immediate reaction was, this is not mine. I don't remember her like this. I didn't build this model. In a sense, I suppose, that is true, for I'm certainly not the man I was 40 years ago, unfortunately. However, it was also rather a unique experience, as instead of slowly seeing a model grow to completion, being confronted with the model suddenly like this was like seeing someone else's model for the first time. It was like arriving in the presence of one's finished model before you actually built it, if that makes any sense. Once out of the box and on the workbench, I was able to not only enjoy the model once again, but take in the damage she'd sustained over the years. She'd certainly been in the wars. Her spar had been bent out of shape, and rigging to both masts was damaged. But by far the most disturbing problem was her decks. There were large areas of dark brown staining along with some smaller patches. In some places this was so dense, black and thick it obscured all detail of the planks. Though I've never come across anything like it before, and I can only surmise that the model was kept for a considerable period of time in very damp and cold conditions without a glass cover. She'd obviously not been cared for, as the glass cover had been missing for many years, going by the collection of dust, sometimes in the form of quite solid nodules that had formed around many of the fittings, including the railings, catapult and crane. So, the rigging was repaired, the growths removed from the decks, which were then cleaned up with a small scraper and damp cotton buds. All dust that could be removed without doing potential damage was cleared away with small brushes. Incidentally, you may notice considerable collections of dust still in evidence on the model, including those hard nodules. These did not show up while carrying out the initial clean, but it's an interesting observation that when photographing something so small and reproducing it at such a large scale, even the apparently invisible becomes disturbingly visible. Most of these patches of dust that were exposed by the extreme close-up photography have been subsequently removed where feasible. Damage to the case was repaired and a new glass cover made with a matching veneer. The result is as you see it in this video. Plus, I'm afraid, that embarrassing dust. There is still some staining to areas of the deck which could not be removed, but it does give the impression of a partially wet deck with some damp patches still in evidence. And to my eyes actually adds something to the realism of the model. And here she is on the bench beside me, all ready to be returned to her owner, after providing me with the satisfaction of bringing her back to life and hopefully providing some of you with a little pleasure along the way. Penelope herself saw extensive action in the Mediterranean before being sunk in February 1944. During her 2 years serving there, she was damaged by shrapnel to such an extent she became affectionately known as HMS Pepperpot. The author C.S. Forrester of Hornblower fame wrote a novel titled The Ship. This was loosely based on HMS Penelope's eventful but sadly short career. It's an exciting and involving, if a little glamorized, glimpse into life aboard a light cruiser serving in the Mediterranean during World War II. I hope you enjoyed the video.